Trap is the latest film directed by M. Night Shyamalan. There is a lot to discuss when talking about this film. Like most Shyamalan films, I feel like this falls into a lot of things that don't really work for me with his films, but also what he does best as a filmmaker is on full display with this picture. I will not be spoiling this film, but I will be discussing what is mentioned within the trailer for it. It stars Josh Hartnett as a girl dad taking his daughter to a pretty generic pop concert from a fictional singer, Lady Raven, played by Shyamalan's own daughter. Pretty sure he's even admitted that this film was really an excuse just to give his daughter a full concert film. But don't worry, it does do a lot more than that. Because while at this concert, Josh Hartnett's character learns that this whole concert is a setup to catch a serial killer called the Butcher. And within the plot twist of the trailer, we learn that Josh Hartnett himself is the Butcher. It's this cat and mouse plot, figuring out if he's going to get out of the concert without getting caught, while also struggling with the relationship with his daughter, who he took to legitimately have a good time at this concert. And so with any Shyamalan film, there are several things that often get brought up. The first is the dialogue and how he writes his characters. And if you haven't been a fan of his previous films and the decisions he does with that, you probably won't enjoy this one. And this is something I struggle with because his dialogue is fairly generic, not very creative. It often comes across as quite clunky, especially within the exposition, trying to get to scene. And it also carries over to the plot, where if you are expecting a thriller of some serial killer trying to escape from the cops, this really isn't that. In fact, there are so many leaps that this plot takes of trying to get from A to B that if you think about it for more than 30 seconds, the whole thing kind of unravels and none of it really makes any sense. But in his defense, I don't think that's what he's trying to do. It's been made very clear over the years that Shyamalan is very intentional with the way that he writes his scripts. There is purpose behind it. It's almost supposed to be this kind of campy feel to the way these characters interact with one another. But if that's not your thing, that's not your thing. And honestly, it's mostly hit or miss for me. There's some of his films where I think it is just a complete mess, but there's other ones where I can look past it and still appreciate what he is trying to show me. And this film falls somewhere right in between, because once you realize what you're actually watching, there's much more appreciation for the visual language that he is communicating. The way the camera shifts through the concert venue over a crowd of people, focusing on faces and objects, and using sometimes very obvious on-the-nose metaphors, but also more subtle themes within it all. I think there are plenty of filmmakers that focus very heavily on the dialogue and the way they tell a story, and my takeaway from most of his films is that that is not something he is interested in. It's almost this meta way of telling a story, acknowledging like, hey, I know I have to communicate this to you, so even though I don't really want to, I'm just gonna do it and get it over with, and there will be people watching this film that have a problem with that. So what is this film trying to do? Well, there's clearly no coincidence of him casting his own daughter and having this whole story revolve around a father-daughter relationship. He's trying to speak to the girl dads out there. And what I find especially interesting is that he uses one of the most extreme situations ever, someone's father being a serial killer, to tell a story about a guy trying to balance some work-life relationship. Throughout the film, we see a man who can't even enjoy being with his daughter because he's so hung up on his own personal stuff. And honestly, it's quite haunting. There isn't a lot of violence necessarily from the serial killer himself, but it's more the knowledge that he exists and the knowledge that he has this hidden life away from the rest of his family. And so for me, one of the most horrific parts was feeling for this child who is sitting alone at a concert while her dad is roaming around the venue trying to plan his escape. It clearly is coming from a very personal thing that Shyamalan is feeling. And so in many ways, I think this film is kind of a beautiful reflection of stuff that he is dealing with, again, told through the most extreme version of that. But with many of his films, I find myself processing it a lot and thinking about specific shots and themes that have resonated with me. But when I was watching the film, I couldn't help but keep rolling my eyes. And so I do love that we have a filmmaker like him, one that makes me think and ponder all these themes and ideas that he's bringing up, while at the same time not always appreciating the films themselves. I don't know, he's always been very polarizing. And for those who were not aware, maybe even alive in the early 2000s when he was really at his peak in popularity, this man was a household name. He was said to be the next Steven Spielberg, and we could honestly make a dozen videos explaining how his career didn't really go the way people thought it would go, but the fact that it has landed him to this point where he gets complete control on the stories he wants to say. I'm glad he is at this point, and these are the types of films that this man needs to be making, despite, once again, me not always liking those films. But those are some of my initial thoughts on Trap, and I would love to hear yours if you have seen the film. So if you've seen it, please comment below, let me know what you think, and I will see you next time.